Hi, welcome to Ocean Yumi's channel. So today we are talking about the FLDS. Um, the church is the Mormon church. It's a Mormon church and it's called the Fundamentalist Church of the Latter-day Saints. Okay, so what I'm going to do, as you know, I always project the characters. Now, this is Warren Jeffs. He ran the Mormon church. He took over from the elder of the Mormon church. Now, there is a lot of information on this man. Not only was he was pulling money, he was doing a lot of stuff. Underage sex, you name it, it was going on in that church. Okay, so I'm going to read a couple articles. I'm going to show some, and I'm going to read some, and there is a few videos on this as well, but I like to just have something here for my channel. Okay, so I'm going to project the face. So there's one. The witness wore a red. A polygamous wife finds a new life. I think this is so. In 2007, a breakdown extremist offshoot of the Mormon Church called the Fundamentalist Church of the Latter-day Saints made the national news. Police raided an FLDS compound in Texas where they found hundreds of women and girls. The church leader Warren Jeffs was sentenced to life plus 20 years behind bars for sexual assaulting children. The star witness in Jeff's trial was a young woman named Rebecca Mesa, and Mesa grew up in the FLDS church under the control of Warren Jeffs. His father, Rulon, when she was 19 years old, she was forced to marry the 85-year-old Rulon. Following his death, Mossa made the terrifying decision to escape from the church into an outside world she had been taught to fear. Mossa tells the harrowing stories of her childhood, her marriage, and her escape from the Mormon Church. The witness wore red, the ninth wife who brought polygamous cult leader to justice. Now, there's highlights of what she says on how her father came to be part of the LFDS, which is a lot to go into, so I won't go into a lot of that. Um, right, let's talk about Warren Jeffs himself. Now, Warren Jeffs, born December the 3rd, 1955, is the president of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, a polygamous denomination. In 2011, he was convicted of 2 felon counts of child sexual assault, for which he is currently serving a life sentence plus 20 years. In in 2006, Jess was placed on FBI 10's most wanted list for his flight from the charges that he had arranged illegally marriages between his adult male followers and underage girls in Utah. In Arizona, charged him with 8 additional counts in 2 separate cases, including incest and sexual contact with minors. In September 2007, Jess was convicted of 2 counts of rape as an accomplice, for which he was sentenced to imprisonment for 10 years to life in Utah State Prison. The conviction was overturned by Utah Supreme Court in 2010 due to flawed jury instructions. Jess was extradited to Texas, where he was found guilty of sexual assault of a child for sex with 15-year-old he had married, and aggressive sexual assault against a child, for which he was sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years fine, $10,000. Now, his early life. Warren Steed Jess was born, like I said, was born. Actually, we're not going to talk about all that. Right. The church leadership. Now, prior to his father's death, 2002, Jeff held the position of counsel to the church leaders. Jeff became Roland's successor with his official title in the FLDS church, becoming president and prophet seer, and there's more stuff. Hi. Now I think I've got one with his son talking. See if I can find the one with his son. Oh, so when you can't make it up. I think this is it. Yeah, I think this is the one.
Was when my dad had he took all of the kids that were 8 years old and younger from their mothers, and so that's kind of where I lost touch, I guess, with the youngest two. And then a few months later, then he took my younger brother that was just younger than me, and so I kind of lost touch with them. I mean, later on, I was able to reconnect a bit, but I feel like, those are some of the very important years for siblings to bond at that young of an age, and they were kind of taken from me at that point. So,
and for those who haven't studied the issue, because I realize not a lot of people delve into subjects.
Yeah.
For those that haven't studied it, why did your father do that?
So,
and how common was it, not only in your family, when this started?
So we were kind of my dad's trial run to see how we would take it. But I mean, it wasn't, there were certain family members that we'd noticed would just disappear, and my dad wouldn't say anything, but that was the first big scale where he took all of and that was, the vast majority of the kids were under 8. So it was, all of a sudden it was dead quiet around the house.
And where did they go?
So he had them taken to a land of refuge up in Colorado, just a compound up there. And that's where he had them taken, and he told us that it was a test and that it was the will of God, and that if he didn't do it, then the law was going to come in. And they were going to come in and take all of us away from him.
So did you believe him when he said that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We believed he was the voice of God, and anything he said was absolutely true. And
without question.
Without question. That was from the time we were young, from the time we were very young, it was a constant reiteration of, you never, ever, ever question the prophet.
And we're skipping a little bit, but that's okay because we're here. I want to just flow with wherever we go.
Yeah.
This is Warren Jeff's son, one of his sons that is talking right now. Um, he's giving his recount of what happened in the FLDS church. Um, there's a lot of things that he speaks about that actually you just think, wow, like for children to go through certain stuff. I mean, he doesn't really go into detail, but he does give away some of what happened in the church.
What happens if you what happens if you do question? Well, two parts to this. What's going on in your mind if you question? And what happens if you actually question? You actually voice.
Even thinking about questioning, my dad, or even thinking about that was, I mean, generally, I know at least for me, like even thinking about that, there was a lot of, like I would shame myself over that and think that even just because I'd thought about it, that my dad knew.
Now, what I'm wondering is, so explain how does that come to be? How do you have these ideas? Is it from having family meetings and your father is just telling you this is the way it is? Is it from Sunday school classes? Where is this information coming from to make you?
So that information is from basically every day. Trying to think how many times we did a gathering. We did like a morning family class that we called Good Words. And then during the school year, there was devotional, which was another, training session, I guess you could call it, where we taught religious stuff. There was the devotional. And then there was for school, during school, then priesthood history. We didn't do normal American history, at least my generation. We didn't do normal American history. We did priesthood history. So that was another, where we'd sit for, half hour to an hour and listen to, my dad preach about, priesthood history. And that a vast majority of that was LDS history, the history of the Mormon Church. And so there was that, and then usually after dinner, then we'd have another family class, and we would read my grandpa's sermons.
So where are there scriptures mingled in these discussions?
Yeah, so the scriptures that we had were my grandpa's sermons, and then in the morning it was Uncle Roy Johnson's sermons, who was the
So
prophet.
are they quoting from the New Testament, Book of Mormon?
Yeah, they're quoting from the New Testament, Book of Mormon, teachings of the prophet Joseph, lectures on faith, and then just basically, expounding on it. So that's why I say a lot of we were, by every definition, Mormon. We were just not a part of the Mormon Church, but the indoctrination and feeling these things that my dad knew, if I was going to question, or if I'd thought about questioning, it came from years of him that many times a day saying things like, the prophet knows if you're lying, and he would quote the scripture in the Bible about Peter and people lying to him, and Peter knocking them dead. And so that's how serious it was, lying to the prophet. And especially since when my dad became the prophet, then it was that much more, you added a whole nother level of critique, critiquing yourself.
So there's, it sounds like, and maybe I've just thought about things. I mean, okay, so I was raised Mormon, where the prophet is the mouthpiece of God. But, and I don't know if this is preached from the Mormon faith, but this is in my mind. I've always kept in the back of my mind, well, but everybody's human.
Right.
Do you have that thought? Or is the prophet perfect in every way?
No, so, and that's another thing that I guess way in the back of my mind, I would be like, wait, but how is he a God if he's been born through, a natural human being? But that was another, eventually it just got to where we just don't, that falls in the realm of don't question. He is, and just don't question it, because we go back to Brigham Young and the Journals of Discourses saying that the prophet is God to the people, literally saying that. And so that's where we got that, mentality, and he would just rivet that over and over into our minds.
So, were you afraid of your father?
Yeah. I was, especially after he became the prophet, I was even more terrified of him, just because I genuinely thought that he could read my mind.
Read your mind.
And it didn't even occur to me until after I left that, he'd been having me write letters to him every week, and I was telling him what I was thinking. That's how he knew. But it's just that kind of, like, he was a very smart man, and a lot of my frustration with him is I feel like that he knew he was an intelligent man, and that at some point he realized what he was doing was wrong, but he decided to keep going. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where I lost a lot of respect for him. Mm-hmm. Virtually all respect. But.
Yeah. So let's go a little bit into the really strained part of the relationship between you and your father. What do you want to say about that? I don't want to lead you. I want you to.
So, for me and my dad, it was a really interesting thing, because for some reason it felt like that he, for some reason, singled me out. Sometimes, like, I would kind of be the guinea pig before he would, before he started sending a bunch of people away from Texas. I was the first one after he gathered the whole family there, and then I was the first one he sent away. And he isolated me from the rest of the family, when I was 11, and by the time I was 12, he would call me and tell me I was the only one of his kids that wasn't worthy to go to Zion. And it went from there. But I feel like that a lot of it came from, the way that he dealt with, as a kid, as kids grow up, they experiment with other kids. And so in my, as a kid, when I was a kid, I did that too. But instead of telling me that I needed to, telling me, gently telling me this isn't right, instead of making it a learning experience and a growing experience for me, he took that and basically right off the bat said that you're a terrible, implied, you're a terrible person. And just kept drilling that into me. And so eventually, it became his beef with me, I guess you could call it a beef, is, that I guess, like, sexual curiosity or whatever turned into masturbating. Mm-hmm. And so then that became the focus of him. Like, every time he would talk to me, but he called it personal morals. He would say, mm-hmm. He's like, are you struggling in your personal morals? Every single time.
How often would he ask you that?
Usually, he would call, every couple weeks at first, but then he started using his calls as leverage. It's a whole shame game, but using his calls as leverage to say, you weren't worthy to talk to me. He would send a message through the caretaker and say, I drove past your house last night, but you weren't praying hard enough, so I couldn't stop. And I was 12, and I just remember thinking, but I was asleep, I couldn't pray. Mm-hmm. But apparently we were supposed to figure out how to do that, both of those at the same time. Mm-hmm. But it was just, it kind of, so it started with that when I was 12. I was separated from the rest of the family, for about 2.5 years, and my dad. I didn't see him for that period either.
What was that like? What did you think in your mind?
It was, I feel like that's where I kind of got my, I guess, solitary mentality. Even now, it's taken me a long time to get close friends, which, and I have close friends now, but I didn't have that for the longest time, and I think that's kind of where like I was feeling so ashamed of myself. And remember this what I did as a kid, and I guess I didn't mention this, but what I did as a kid, like experimenting sexually. I lost my dad when I was 12. Called me and says, "You're no longer a member of the church," and he didn't do that to anyone.
He said that. Oh, we didn't talk about this. Me and you didn't talk about it.
He revoked my membership, and he wasn't doing that to. He was only doing that to people like men that he would kick out of town. But for me, he says, you have to be rebaptized. You're no longer a member of the church. You need to be rebaptized.
Warren just sent away a number of boys, which is now called the Lost Boys. He sent them away when he thought that they were getting with the women or the girls in the set. So he sent away his son as well, which is interesting that he sent away his son, one of his sons, for being exploring himself as a young boy, I suppose. But yeah, there is a few guys that he sent away that is now called the Lost Boys, where he just used to drive them in the middle of nowhere and just left them in the middle of nowhere. This might possibly turn into a two-part because there's a lot to cover and it can't all be covered in one video. So I'm going to let his son finish talking and then we're going to move to the other bits, hopefully. But if it goes on too long, I might cut it and then come back to the son again.
Because
is this in a personal interview situation?
This is on a personal phone call.
On a phone call.
Yeah. And so I was always terrified of letting anyone around me know that he had told me that. So because nobody else knew that. But then it just kind of went from there. Just a lot of, every time I would talk to him on the phone, that was glaring in my face that I was one of his sons, and I'm held to this higher standard that he would tell us all the time. You're held to this higher standard because of who you are. And here I am, one of his sons at 12. And like, I laugh, I'm finally where I can laugh about it now because I'm like, I was 12. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
But it was that, every time he would call me, it was just, have you been, basically the condition was, have you been masturbating? If you have, then you can't become a member again. You can't be rebaptized. But if you have, sounds bad, but to be trusted to become a human trafficker, generally you have to have the confidence of the leaders, and they have to know that you're not going to, question what's going on. You just do what you're told. And so you have to approach it as though these people genuinely believe that what they're doing is right. We don't know what we're doing is wrong, especially even when my dad he started marrying younger and younger girls, and like a lot of people wonder how these dads would be able to do that. And even now, like I've like told myself sometimes, if I were in that situation and my dad wanted me to do something like that, I would draw a line. But I don't think I would. I don't think I would have with that mentality.
Because it goes right back
because
to...
like now I'm so far removed from it that I have the input of my brain that's evolved to where I'm at now, but I have to step back to where I was before and realize the consequences if I don't do it, which are eternal damnation, etc., etc. Like that's the mindset they have is I either do this or eternal damnation and stuff like that. But so that's why like a lot of fathers were willing to like let their daughters marry my dad and stuff like that. And there's definitely some people that are probably enjoy it or but the majority,
for the most part, it's probably
for the most part they genuinely think what they're doing is right. And so that's again where I say, like, we need to approach it with a much more compassionate and understanding perspective, because confronting them, like, you'll never be able to. I mean, the process of ending this human trafficking and sexual abuse and all of that, the process is going to be extended much longer if we just keep this stigma and build on the stigma that these are bad people and all the they know they're doing wrong, but they're doing it anyway. It's not true. We think we're doing right. We know we're doing right. And so somehow we need to change that stigma or erase that stigma and approach and it's not just the FLDS. It's, we need to approach, like, all of the polygamous groups. With any group that, that there's this problem of human trafficking or sexual abuse, sex trafficking.
The exploitation. We do have a few questions. Let me ask these just because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Are you married to one woman? Are you still FLDS? I guess we didn't get to that.
No, I'm not married to one woman, and no, I'm not still FLDS, and no, I'm not polygamist.
Are they still kicking out teenage boys?
Yes, but in a different way. Generally, being kicked out usually means you get sent away from the community to work on an isolated crew somewhere in the U.S.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Do you plan on living polygamy?
No, I do not.
Definitely not.
No.
Let's talk about that for just a second. When did you decide this? Talk about when you left. When you were done.
So when I left, even before I left. So again, with their polygamy question, even before I left, I knew that I didn't really have the capacity of, I'm too much of a I don't know, I tend to, when I really love someone, I tend to concentrate everything on that person, and so I can't do that. I remember even before I left, I was like, I don't see how I could genuinely care about and love somebody. And I don't think I could do it with two people.
So he's single.
I am single.
He is available.
But no, that was something that I made up my mind before I left. But when I left, it was just kind of the culmination of a lot of this stuff of years of being separated. There was times I was with the family back in 2009 and 2010, where the years and half of 2010 is when I was back with the family. But all the rest of the time, generally, I was separated from everybody. And about 2 years before I left, my dad never explicitly said, "Don't talk to your mom." My mom just quit answering the phone and then eventually changed her number, which usually that meant he would talk to her and say, "Don't do it." And the last time I talked to her was in I think it was early 2012. And she just says, I love you, I miss you, and I don't think we're supposed to be talking, And so, and that was I don't know, dropped a boulder on my heart, I remember being in the fourth story of a town place inn down there in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We were building it. I was on a crew down there and just bawling my eyes out because I thought maybe that was the last time I was going to get to talk to her, and so far it has been. But it was just a lot of that. It kept happening. It kept more and more distance. Eventually, my dad says, "Don't talk to any of your siblings." It was when I was still in Shore Creek. He says, if you run into them, don't talk to them, because I had been expressing my doubts and telling him I was thinking about leaving, being honest with the prophet and all. And I'd been telling him that, and so he didn't want me to spread my doubts with the other family members. And so that was kind of his motivation behind separating me. But eventually, by the time I left, I hadn't talked to my mom in 2 years, hadn't seen any of the family in, I don't know, like 9 months at least. And so it was just, it got to the point where it's like, I got to where I really enjoyed things out here, like movies and music and stuff like that. And I was just like, there's not enough time for me to repent, because my dad had constantly said, if you don't repent in time, you're going to be destroyed with the wicked. And so I was just like, with what I've done, I've watched porn and listened to country music and videos and movies. And so with what I've done, these horrible, horrible sins, which, by the way, these are great things, but with what I've done, there's not enough time. And so I just as well leave. And I still believed in my dad. I was like, I just as well leave and enjoy some happiness before I die, because I'm going to die within the next couple of years. And so that's when I was just like, I'm going to do this. And I'm generally a very impulsive guy, and so I had to do this on an impulse, because I was terrified if I told anybody that I was going to do it, they would talk me out of it. And so I literally bought the ticket at 9:30 in the morning and took off running from a job site down there in downtown Des Moines, and got a taxi for the first time, and went back to the house and gathered my stuff and went to the airport. And then when I got to the airport, then I found out my flight was canceled, and so I had to sit there for 8 hours and think about what I'd done.
Oh boy!
So I was like, I was terrified. I was just like, that's when I was like, oh my God, this is everything my dad said it would be, because I felt so horrible, and it was, I could hear my mom, crying. I knew she was going to be punished and hurt, and that was part of the reason I'd stayed so long, is because I'd hoped that,
Okay, so because there's quite a lot to cover, I can't even play that whole video. I might have to just either upload it up, cut out bits and upload it up, because he speaks about a lot of how he feels, what happened to him. I believe he was one of the Lost Boys that got put out of the FLDS. See, I can't even say it. Yes, so now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go back to the leader of the FLDS, Roland Jeffs. Whoops. Roland Jeffs. As you can see, he's a very old man. He had a very young wife. His wife was 19 years old. So Roland Jeffs, the late president of the FLDS, was rumored to have 75 wives, because he did polygamous. When Rebecca Wall was growing up in Fundamental Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints faith in the Utah in the 90s, her family greatly admired the Jeffs family for being prophets of the religion. The Jeffs was notorious in FLDS community. They served as presidents of the church for decades. The male Jeffs family members are also known for having polygamous relationships and dozens of wives. Rebecca Well grew up in the polygamous family, as her father, Lloyd Wall, had 25 children with his three wives. So it wasn't a foreign concept for her to eventually marry into one herself. Upon in 1995, Rebecca Wall learnt that Roland Jess, the president of the church, had a vision that she would become the 19th wife. At the time, he was in his late 80s, and he would go on to marry dozens of more women after that. So there's a picture of Rebecca. In the years that followed her marriage, Rebecca just said that she had endured extreme trauma and abuse. Once Roland Jeffs died in 2002 at the age of 92, she feared for her safety and left the religion. She's speaking out about her marriage and Jeff's family in the Dateline episode. So I'm gonna try and get Rebecca before we go to the investigator himself. Oh, that's the wrong one. See, I can get one that's not going to get me knocked. Uh, okay, let's hear from Rebecca before we get to the other side, the other things at hand.
Wicked ones who would be destroyed by God, and that we were the one true chosen people of God on the whole face of the earth. I remember
She
looking
speaks
and
very low.
thinking, how can all these people be bad? What a mean God to make the whole wide world just be evil and wrong, because I didn't see only ugliness. Our interaction with the outside world was limited, but sadly, it wasn't so much what the outside world did to us. That fear was infused in us by the church authorities to create a big gap between us and then the outside world, and it kept the youth, which is, their people supply, from being able to breach that gap and trust anybody except their authorities.
For people on the outside, sometimes it's difficult for us to understand what really happens and how someone can gain so much control. But if that's all you know, and if your life is governed by fear, then it does make a lot more sense. And when did you realize that something wasn't right? When did you believe that you didn't fit in here any longer?
I remember even as a child really struggling. I just couldn't fully accept everything that I was being told. And then I felt really wicked and ashamed that I questioned what my parents were telling me about God, and also that I questioned my ability to go to heaven, because I had this brain that I could not stop the questions from coming. And so it was a big struggle even as a child, but especially when I, at 19, was forced to marry Will and Jeff at 85, and I saw this man who was supposed to be God in mortality. I saw the very human side of him, and I experienced tremendous amount of sexual violation and abuse at his hand, and all the while being told, this is what God wants you to do. And that was really where the disillusionment started to happen. Everything we were told about the prophet, and then seeing the reality of what he was just a mortal man who, had some very distasteful tendencies just toward women, especially, and being completely okay with the subjugation of women. That was very hard for me, and that was the defining factor, that after 7 years and he died, I could not stomach that anymore. Could not bring myself to do that again.
Was there a lot of abuse taking place within that community?
There is a tremendous amount of abuse on every single level. In my father's home, there was mental, physical, spiritual, sexual, in every kind, not just to me. And in societies like this, because of the shame around people's sexuality, I do have personal knowledge that it is rampant in a group like the FLDS. The incest, the sexual violation is there, and they don't give the kids the ability to understand that their body is theirs, that they have the ability to say, no, you will not touch me. They are given no knowledge of that. It's just a secret, and they are told, you be quiet. I mean, I was even threatened that if you tell anyone, I will kill your mother. And so it's time, and I think that in speaking out from my story, sexual violation is something that is rampant in every society, on every country, and there's so much shame attached to it. And I think that when one person speaks out, then it gives others the courage to be able to move and speak out about their own shame that they have carried. And it's time to be able to bring light to this and to know that you're not alone in it and that there is healing possible and that we have the ability to create that change.
So, Rebecca, when you decided to leave, were you free to go? How did you get out from under the control of, at this time, it was the son?
For me, I was not free to go. I did not tell anyone goodbye. I could not. They would not have let me leave. I left a note on my bed, and I slipped out in the middle of the night, and I actually had to climb up over this great big wall in my long skirt, long hair, and then was able to escape to get, from Utah all the way up to Coos Bay, Oregon. And it was very terrifying. It was to that point in my life, that was the scariest thing I'd ever done. But what I realized is it's one thing to leave a group like the FLDS, and it is a completely other issue to be able to get that FLDS mindset, the thinking out of each person, and in my case, me. And it was a big struggle, and it's something that I still work on regularly, and I work very hard on to undo the mental programming and to be able to learn better ways, healthier ways of integrating with life and personal expression. And it's quite a journey, but it is also a liberating one.
On this show, Rebecca, we talk often about change and transition and getting through life challenges, and yours is an extreme case, but you had the strength to do what you knew needed to be done. And what was it like for you on the outside? How did you survive? I mean, I can't even imagine what the outside world must have been like for you.
It was overwhelming. It was confusing. I had no idea how to handle the outward transformation, even just like trying to figure out how to do makeup, what to do with short hair after I got my hair cut. It was overwhelming. And yet also the inward transformation that has taken place, I really read a lot and I wanted to find truth. You have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to take a really honest, hard look. And sometimes it's hard to admit that. The things that I did, the things that I allowed to happen, and to be able to be willing to learn. And one thing that I'm a huge advocate for is getting professional, very good therapy, good counseling. And that has been a tremendous gift for me to be able to start to undo, because the complex mind control and programming that happens and literal brainwashing in a society like the FLDS it's very hard to undo, especially on your own. So it's been a path, it's been a journey, and yet it also, the best part is that it does change. It's little steps and they add up.
When did you decide to take your story public, to get involved with helping others that are part of this organization and actually bring a lot of it down? When did you decide to do all of this?
When I left the FLDS and I started to taste choice and to taste equality, to taste respect and freedom and understand my basic human rights, I was then able to quantify the amount of violation that was going on inside of the FLDS. And I knew, based on what I experienced as even the prophet's wife, the amount of violation on every level, and to realize that is not normal, then it gave me just such a fire inside that it has to stop. And I was in a unique position because I was the only one of the prophet's family. That's like the royal family in that culture, to escape, to be able to start speaking out, to be able to talk about what was going on behind closed doors, to really create an effective difference. It was terrifying. Even though I wanted it to change, I wanted the violation to stop, it was the scariest thing for me to be able to go to the authorities and breach that, the fear that I had of the outside world, but I also knew that I could not live with myself if I did nothing.
Are you in touch with any of the other people that got out?
I am in touch with some of them that get out, and everybody leaves a society like this, and they're on their own journey, and there's many different paths. Some who have left are grateful, and a lot of them are women who experience the same kind of violation. It's interesting, though, because for the FLDS men, when they leave that group, they lose a lot of their control. They're told from birth, you always have power over women. And yet for the women who leave, it's the most liberating thing, because you all of a sudden have freedom and equality. And so it's a mixed perspective for others, whether they agree or disagree with what I've done in the courtroom. And to me, everyone has their individual right. I do have a tremendous amount of love and compassion for everybody's journey, and I hope that in the end, everyone will experience peace, they will experience healing.
So Rebecca escaped um, through, well, what's it, under the cover of darkness. She was definitely abused a lot by Jeff's in a lot of ways. He really was forced. He forced her to be his wife. She was not for it. There is a good one, a good what I say depiction of this um, cult, where you kind of get insight into how Jess really think. So whoever gave away the story actually got them to depict him the way he would have been. So you actually get that inside vision of him. He was definitely not a nice guy at all by any means at all. Um, so there was Rebecca. There was another young lady who escaped with her. But it looks like I would have to turn this into a two-part one. But if it turns into a two-part, it's fine. Now, Jeff's um, ruled over ruled over the Mormons. I just call them Mormons right now. He ruled over them with a mighty hand. He was not, he was no means not the nicest of guys. Like I said, there was also the Lost Boys in all this. Now these was young men, like I said, who was attracted to the women, the girls there, or whatever, and he would send them away. Right, he would literally send them away, and they'll be left stranded in different parts of Utah. And some of them got through it okay, and some of them didn't. And luckily, I think they formed some kind of group and was able to work together. But I'm going to show one of the Lost Boys. Oh, show the information on the Lost Boys, should I say? So the FLDS Warp Lives the Lost Boys recount. So this is one of the Lost Boys. Now Brent Jeffs was one tired out ex-Mormon fundamentalist last week in Denver, but still a man on a mission. Back to back bookings, signings, 17 hours days in Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Denver for Jeff's recent released memoir, Lost Boys, alternatively wound him up and wore him down to feeling like a zombie, he said. Jeff struggles a day job with European dental products with a personal quest. Brent, the 26-year-old nephew of Warren Jeffs, the convicted felon, the former prophet of the Fundamental Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, is determined to make known the extent of what he describes as his Uncle Warren's evil. At the same time, Brent have fair treatment of remaining the members of the sect, which has several outposts in Colorado. Brent wants people to know that forced underage marriages was not only the horrors under Warren Jeffs. Brent years ago filed a civil lawsuit on Warren Jeffs in which he alleged that his uncle had raped him several times when he was in kindergarten and first grade. Warren Jeffs used church to satisfy his own pervert perverted sexual appetites to control every aspect of members' lives. Brent claims as a prophet, the title the sect gives its leader. He banned almost all music and all literature except for the Book of Mormon and the Bible. He even banned dogs and most famously ejected many young boys from FLDS families. With Warren Jeffs now in Utah State Prison after conviction on 2 counts of being an accomplice to rape, the sex towns such as Colorado City and Utah are coming back to enable of the normal life, Brent said. things are much more mellow. Oh, he's going to talk about him growing up. Okay, let's get to this bit. Now, Brent, who is brought up and articulate as well as received, said Sharon Price, spokesman for the Diversity of Foundation, a South Lake City-based nonprofit to 350 young ex-members of the cult. We're gonna call it a cult. It helped arrange the West Cliff Forum. Everything he has been through only deepens his soul and compassion, Prince says. Uncle Warren was one of Brent's 65 uncles and aunts on his uncle's side of the family. There were 22 on his mother's side. Brent said the abuse began when he was 5 and took place in the bathroom at the church. It continued when he was enrolled in first grade in the Cult Academy, where Warren Jeffs served first as the teacher and later as the principal. When Brent moved on, he said Warren Jeff moved on to other victims. Some of Brent's brothers was also, abused as well. Victims at the same age, he says. Brent's father had 3 wives and 17 children. His mother was loving. His father's younger 2 wives was not particularly kind, he said, and were very brutal at times. Although Brent was the grandson of the Reverend Prophet Roland Jeffs, he was one of the hundreds of teenagers forced out of the cult church. The boys, some as young as 13, was considered surplus to requirements. The older, more powerful men required at least 3 wives to achieve the highest realm of heaven. Younger men competing for young women upset the balance. The issue of the polygamy is what split the Mormon sect from the mainstream church in 1886. The breakaway cult sect called The Work refused to relinquish the practice of marriage, with the majority of Mormons did in 1819. The mainstream Mormons gave up polygamy because it stood in the way of statehood. I want to get to the part where he throws them out. The Lost Boys is very significant in all of this, but it's taking long to get to that point. So, I'm also going to go back to Rebecca again. Now, like she said, Rebecca was the 19th wife before she was a key witness against Warren Jeffs. Now, often highlights of the darkest corners of America on the last night's episode of the story of the cult leader Warren Jeffs, Rebecca Musi, the woman who helped seal his fate. But before Musi was the key witness for the state against Jeffs, she was married to the cult leader. Yeah, I read that part already in it. See, they repeat themselves in articles. That's what I noticed. Doesn't really say a lot after that, but it's okay. It's all right. I'll probably have to do a part 2 of this because I feel that I need to cover more ground. We also need to hear the story itself. And as you know, I do the podcasts and I let them do the story because the way how it's told, even I cannot even explain it to as well as that. Now, this person, hold on, I am going to the wrong bit. Now, this person here, he was, when someone has a taste for something, he's similar to what African Bambaataa would have done in the Bronx. The only difference is that how he was a religion, still a religion, and You know, obviously, when somebody's saying, "Oh, it's a word from God," it's a word from God, people would listen to that person, and they will believe in that person. And this is what has happened with this one, because his family probably have ruled the FLDS for a long time, right? So he's a product of that cult, the Mormons church or whatever it's called. So whatever was in him, he leashed it on the members, you know. But I am gonna play one of the, I think it's the same lady. No, this is a different one. Somebody escaping it as well.
So there was three leaders that were, Joseph Smith was the first one, Brigham Young was the next, and then John Taylor. And those are still leaders of the LDS mainstream church. Mm-hmm. And then he claimed that there was a secret meeting that John Taylor had called the 8-hour meeting, that he set apart 8 people to carry on polygamy no matter what. And then he passed away without telling everybody about the meeting. And so there was in the past, like before him, the next leader, Brigham Young, was after Joseph Smith. He was the highest position, appointed position in the church at the time. So he kind of got the authority. And this is how Warren just described it. He said, Wilford Woodruff was in that position. And so everybody voted him in. The church members decided to vote him in. And he said that was all done wrong, because God chooses who the leader really is, whose heart is right. And so that's kind of how he also usurped authority to become the leader, is because he said God chose, you don't get any say in it. God just decides, and then you either follow or you don't.
Well, that kind of reminds me of like the arranged marriages you're talking about. Like he says you have a choice, but really you don't, because if you don't choose what the prophet says, now you're disobeying God.
Right.
In a sense. Yeah.
Right. The whole time it was like what we were allowed to hear was only what the church allowed us to hear. And they taught us that if we heard news or media or anything from a different source, it was tainted with lies, and the devil will tell 100 truths to slip in one lie. So we couldn't have television after, like, I was 9 years old and that got outlawed. We couldn't have any movies of any kind. We couldn't have...
Wouldn't they call it Gentile? He would always call this as like the Gentile media, or Gentile is Gentile that.
Or apostates, even like on the news and stuff. He didn't want people hearing outside sources at all. Mm-hmm. He had already told us that music wasn't okay before I don't even remember when that happened. I think it was before I was born. And then, because I don't ever remember listening to outside music, like, unless somebody was just like breaking the rules. Like, I knew they were breaking the rules when I heard the beat and different things. Yeah. And then television was outlawed when I was about 9, and then internet was outlawed we called it outlawed when I was in Warren Jeff's family, and there was something else. I can't remember the other thing. It will come to me. But yeah, all of those things. So books too. He got to where they all had to be handmade. They couldn't have pictures that weren't taken by you and stuff like that. So, and the music was all made by the church too. Like we had music. It was just piano. They couldn't have a drum or anything in it.
I've actually listened to some of Warren Jeff's, him singing with the piano. So I kind of know just a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish I heard that. I never heard that.
Yeah, I think it was one of the videos you sent me. But yeah, it's definitely, there's definitely, I can only imagine what it must be like. And again, I'm a movie connoisseur, but there's an M. Night Shyamalan movie that came out. It was back in 2004, The Village. And the whole aspect is there's this, and you haven't seen it by now. I'm sorry, spoiler. You should have seen it. It came out.
I think I might have saw The Village.
Okay. But
I
yeah,
think so.
it's you see these people in the whole movie. You think you're living in the 1800s, and what you find out it was actually this isolated community, and even above the where they were, there was a no-fly zone, so there were no planes flying over. So people literally thought they lived in the 1800s, and it wasn't until you find out at the end of the movie, no, it's not the case. They're living in the modern day. There's this whole whatever the agenda was. But yeah, real quickly, I just remember, as much as I can remember seeing the news when this happened, you can go back in the story, but just seeing people that looked at it, who were dressed and they looked like something out, like a set piece out of Little House on the Prairie,
Like a pioneer.
Yeah, it's and even you using the language outlaw.
Yeah.
That's like, and I love it too because I grew up loving westerns too. That's definitely like 1800s Western language, but I love it. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, our language is a lot different. Like even the interpretations that the Bible has, and like grace in the Mormon church means mercy, and grace in the Bible is not mercy at all. It's so I've learned some of the different interpretations of the same word.
Yeah.
That's just and it intensified to a major extreme in War Unjust group.
Yeah.
That not everybody is like aware of, but yeah, they are so extreme in every way. So like anyway, I'll keep going with the story.
No, go for it.
So anyway, I went to school. I learned about like constant indoctrination, like every day. And one of the things he taught us was about when our turn came for our arranged marriage. We could never date. We could never even, they would separate the girls and boys in like 4th grade. If we even thought a bad thought, then we had to confess it. We were taught to confess or tattle on people if they told, they told you instead of the leader. And it was like a punishable sin that you could actually be sent away, lose your family and everything forever.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was like a really it was like almost like there's a verse in the Doctrine and Covenants, I think, that talks about, I don't know if it's in the Bible, but it talks about if you even thought about somebody else and that isn't good,
Right. Yeah.
then it's somehow a punishment. Anyway, so they applied everything to the extreme compound thing. So they actually thought they were gorillas. Like,
Wow.
Yeah.
So basically, they had no life. They weren't living life, basically. They're living in the 1800s kind of vibes. Because when you look at them, they do look like Amish, Little House on the Prairie looking kind of people. When I used to see pictures of them on TV programs, I was thinking Little House on the Prairie, but now it's come quite apparent that's apparently what they look like. Like, when people is isolated from the outside world, right? It's all new to them. It's like, they're like, he didn't want them tainted. He wanted them to be of innocence. That's what I'm getting from this description, what she just said. Anyways, we're going to listen more to what she says, because she is another escape one from the cult. I ain't even going to call it a church, from the cult, basically. Even with dogs, they weren't allowed to have dogs. He took away all that. TV, bicycles, because bicycle was red. It was taken away. He really was very much a dictator in this cult. Oh yeah, and the reason why money is shown, because when he tried to escape, he had money in the back of the car. He had money and rifles in the back of the car. So when they got him, right, all that was at the back, and that's what they displayed. That's why that picture is there. So I'll let her continue.
Yeah, it was pretty sad, but
When it came to your especially with your upbringing, a lot of times cult members will, especially growing up, you're isolated from the outside world, but then as far as like your education goes and learning skill sets, whatever they are for how to actually like deal with the world, a lot of times that's denied as well, because typically you might be doing some sort of like labor or work or things like that. There's a lot of times where that's affected people, for example, who grew up in Scientology, where they're going through the Scientology learning courses, and they're part of, maybe they're, a lot of times their parents are part of the Sea Org, and so they're in some sub school, and if something happens where a lot of them have left, they end up just being sort of thrown into this world that they're just not prepared for, because all they've ever known is this. As far as education goes, maybe you could talk about that generally, and then like talk about yourself, as a girl growing up in the FLDS. What was that like?
Yeah. So, they tried to scare us away from the truth. Now I know that. I didn't know that when I was being raised in there, and all I could hear was what they had to say. But now that I know the difference and I've experienced the difference, I know that they had a lot of tools and tactics to blindside us, to do what they wanted us to do instead of what was logical or what might actually be better. So an example of that is like, one of my sister wives had a really sad story one day. She was talking about so she grew up in a ranch, with just her brothers and sisters. Her family was the only people there. She met, she knew the church. She was in the church her whole life. She knew people, but she didn't daily interact with people other than her family. So it's like a really prairie, and then she marries Warren Jeffs later. And she had a hard time because he corrected her father. And she gets up one day and he told her to tell us this story about how he called. She was having a hard time with it for like a month. She wouldn't talk to him when he called her. And so he punished her. And what he did is he called the caretaker, the person who was watching the household, buying the groceries and everything. 'Cause she was struggling. He had a house in hiding that she was living in. He had the caretaker go and buy some clothes that were like Gentile clothes, and told her to like put them on, wear them. And he drove her all the way to Vegas, and it was the middle of the night, like 10 o'clock at night, she said. They gave her one little phone and told her to walk down the street in the middle of the dark in Vegas and watch. He said, I want you, Warren Jeffs told her, I want you, because he talked to her on the phone, and he's like, I want you to stare at all of the graffiti and all the stuff and just see what you will be like if you don't stay faithful to the church.
Oh my goodness, he's terrifying her.
And she's telling us the story, so it's putting all of us into like this contrast shock.
He's vicariously speaking to you through her, through this traumatic experience that he put through her through.
Yeah.
Wow.
And she walked, that was life-threatening. In Vegas, like in the middle of the dark, all alone. And so she walked down the street and she kept crying. She said she was crying and crying, and then he would call every once in a while, and she would say, is it over? Is it over? And he's like, no. And he would just hang up, and, it was really cruel. Like, and in the end, he didn't let it be over for like a whole nother day, like he sent her to a hotel and told her to watch TV, and it was just so, it's not how the world is at all. And so the way that they portray it is not accurate. There's a lot of good people in this world. There's, I know that now. But they do tell you it's a scary, dangerous, bad place. And another thing about the Bible, they don't explain so much detail about how love versus works is. And that's a really big deal, because if you really knew the Bible, there's so many solutions.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But they hide it all from you. And they know that they're hiding it from you. Mm. So, and they get to study, like they have leaders who are appointed to study what's really going on out in the world. And stuff like that. Just so they can protect themselves and, keep themselves in check. But not everybody is allowed to do that. So, yeah, they know.
Yeah, of course. There's like three different options if you're someone claiming to be a prophet. It's either that you're mentally disturbed, thinking that you're talking to God, or that you're talking to maybe a spirit that's an evil spirit, could be deceiving you. Or the third option is that you know that you're not a prophet, you know, and you're doing these things to control and manipulate people, and you get pleasure from it. Like, that's kind of terrifying.
Yeah, he was, he did like to, it seemed like he liked taking hope away from people really slowly and painfully. And there's so many people that suffer from that, you know?
Yeah.
Just, it's devastating, the trauma that, you know, like he would find out what you liked and then just like use it against you.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Another thing too, because you talked about being put on the outside of the road, and Ian, we talked on the phone, maybe you just know, this is more a different vantage point, but this is something that was a prominent story that came up with Warren Jeffs, is that there were boys who continually from my understanding, would continue to show up in Salt Lake or in other places in Utah because they had been kicked out.
Yeah.
Because from my understanding, Jeff saw them as they get older as competition, and he didn't like that, and so a lot of them would get just kicked out because they violated some rule for a particular reason. That was always vague and arbitrary. It was just, this is how it is. I'm the prophet. You've sinned. You're now a Gentile. You're out.
And these people were illiterate and like with barely any education at all.
Yeah. So like I was telling you how the boys had the rules that were stricter. It was easy to make him so strict that they couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that happens so much. People don't even realize as often it happened. And it started to get to be parents, especially later when Jess became the leader. And he didn't like teaching parents because they have the option to leave.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to, and he's a pedophile too, so he likes children, and also he traps them in until they're 18. Like he had the parents sign away their rights to the church for the children, saying everything belongs to God, sign this paper, it's legal, and it's not legal. But the parents don't always know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they sign their children over to the church, and then he calls them up and tells them, you aren't worthy of your kids, you need to go and repent, go to a house far away and send me money. And they do it because they just want to someday see their kids again.
Yeah. As far as the theology, I want to just get your thoughts on something, because this is going to go in a couple different avenues. At least what I'm going to try and do is that polygamy. Initially, that was something that was started by Joseph, and then Brigham really kind of brought that to the forefront. And then it wasn't until where the Mormon Church was threatened to be exiled into Utah when they then had a revelation to get rid of polygamy. But Section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants has never been removed from the LDS Scriptures. It's still part of the canon. So I've always seen there's this conflict between what's being said and even the argument that subsects of the current Mormon Church could make the argument against them that they're the ones who have apostatized and that we're the ones who need to restore it. Would people in the FLDS, they believed in polygamy, that was a central aspect of their doctrine or of the gospel of Jesus Christ. But would they also talk about the current Mormon Church, that they were an apostate, or what's your perspective on that from their vantage point?
So actually, I only know Warren Jeffs' interpretations really, because like I said, he ruled his father, and then he was the one that became the leader next. But he actually compiled all the books of all the leaders in the FLDS. So even if somebody else said it, he chose if it got to be put in the book.
Wow.
So yeah. So what I would say about Warren Jeffs' interpretation of the LDS Church is his father actually was a convert from the Mormon Church. But he said because they're really racist, when the Mormon Church updated their doctrine and got away with racism, then that was when they apostatized.
So Spencer W. Kimball who got the revelation.
Yeah.
And that's when Rulon Jeffs left? That was Warren Jeffs' father, right?
No, Rulon had already been a convert for years.
Okay.
I don't know when he became a convert, but I think it was before that.
Okay.
And so, yeah, he was very, like, I don't know any of the the groups branches off of the LDS church that aren't racist. Like all of them are pretty much have their twist on racism.
On the fence sitters.
Yeah. It's crazy, but I don't really like. I have some ideas on because of what I went through, but it's kind of far fetched, and I'm going to put it in my book because I need the sequencing to be able to explain some of the concepts and stuff. Like, there's certain things that if you saw how the indoctrination got so intense, it's easier to understand.
For sure.
But so in my story, when I went to school and I was just constantly being indoctrinated with what they wanted me to hear, and then I remember being told about when our turn came to be married, there would be like 3 different routes the leader would go to be able to decide who your partner was. And one of them was he would just tell you, your partner so-and-so, like what happened to my parents. Or, he told us this like if you listen, he had a whole book on polygamy called The Enlightened Truth that he wrote.
Jeff's did.
Warren Jeffs, yeah. And there was another route that he would like ask you if you had an impression from God yourself of who you were supposed to marry, and then if you lie, then there's a consequence. So, and then the other route was that the last route was if he says you need to go away and pray and figure out and come back to me and ask me if you think so and so is supposed to be your partner, and then I'll tell you yes or no. And all of them, he has the ultimate say.
Right.
So, as a child, I remember I would like get premonitions. I don't know if you guys know I don't know who believes in premonitions, but I know that's what it's called when I would dream. I would dream that the room was darkly lit, and that Warren Jeffs would turn to me and he'd say, "Do you have an impression of who you're supposed to marry?" And I remember waking up every time at that point. Like, wow. I would just wake up out of a dead sleep, even as a little girl. And I got teased my entire life, because in a situation where you don't have any choice, like you're not dating, it's a different kind of tease. It's like everybody's looking at the leader to decide what he might, who he's, what he's acting like. Yeah. And so my whole life I was teased about marrying Warren Jeffs, and I was terrified of that. I didn't want to marry Warren Jeffs because I didn't have the status, I didn't have the life experiences that would help me advance in his family higher.
Would there be different, as many wives as he had? There would be certain wives that would obviously have favor or the other.
Yes.
I think Rachel Jeffs talked about this in her book.
Yeah. That
within that whole community there is very difficult, even if you were sort of the favorite, because all the other wives, there'd be jealousy and there'd be a lot of competition. That would be the case?
Yes. But with me, I wasn't the favorite, and I knew I never would be. I would be more of a servant. Wow. And that didn't sound very exciting to me. Right. So I was more terrified. I remember as a teenager, I had a best friend who was like the favorite family. And she was talking one day about Warren Jeffs, and I said, I get teased all the time about marrying Warren Jeffs. And she says, if I did, I would love that. And I remember looking at her like, you what? Like, I wouldn't love that. And then I realized the difference. She was in the favorite family. She probably would be advanced.
Wow.
In my situation, I knew I would be more of a servant. Like,
it's like
that
a
didn't
caste
sound
society
good.
In a sense. Like
yeah.
people have their roles. Like
we all had roles.
Yeah.
It was even harder in his family. Now that I look back and I know emotion and stuff now, I had to keep sweet no matter what in there, and I could never express anything. I could never do anything like this. But now that I recognize, I remember feeling, I just didn't identify it at the time. Mm-hmm. And I didn't struggle as hard as most of them because I didn't love Warren Jeffs at all. I was kind of like, you guys can have him. And I went overboard with that. And that's what made him ultimately really mad, is that I would just give him away. He's like, you can't do that every single time. I'm like, I'm living the doctrine to the T. Love one another. You guys can have him. And he thought I was playing hard to get. And the reality is I didn't really ever bond. I never wanted to.
Yeah.
So, his family, like with polygamy, he had a favorite wife for sure, and she was all the time with him. She was a secretary, and she did most of all of his work, and so he's basically a monogamist. Even though he had, I've heard the number from somebody who has the Texas records is like 79. Ultimately, when he got caught. I don't know if he's had some spiritually sealed since, that happens sometimes.
Yeah.
But so he basically was monogamist, and he did have like his power trip stuff and his things that he would decide he wanted to do, but most of us didn't have any say.
Yeah.
I remember after I went to Texas and I got introduced to some of the stuff that he was doing. And I got introduced. The very first training I got after I married him was a really shocking training. And it was the whole time. So when I went into the ceremony to get married, it happened exactly like my premonitions, except for I didn't wake up. I was already there.
Wow.
I actually went into shock. But it felt like a trap. Because he's the one that groomed me, basically. He was my principal. He was my,
Just a question real quickly, just totally adding on to what you're saying. With the FLDS believing in polygamy, and that being one of their primary examples, it wasn't until Warren Jeffs took over that he introduced underage marriage, correct?
Well,
he obviously ended up
he
acting
took it
upon
to
that.
an extreme.
Right.
He took it to a really strong extreme, the highest extreme that you could possibly take. And that's what he did with everything.
But I guess my question would be, with him when he was the principal, he really worked his way to be in power. He had planned this for a long time. So in the same way that he was playing his cards to get to the top and to take Rulon Jeff's place, going back to the beginning of the podcast, when you talked about being in class and you talked about you can either say yes or no, those sort of conversations, that would be grooming,
Yes.
conditioning you for this time to where you are now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I get into the room and it's identical like my dreams, like it was a warning, and I had a friend who at 14 just all of a sudden, she was a really good girl. Like she was loved by her family, really. I mean, as far as I knew, I went over to her house a lot. She was my age. And at 14, she just upped and left. And she said she felt like she was going to marry Warren Jeffs. She was scared too. She didn't want to. And so I remember my family like laughing about that and just playing these games. Like she was never going to, she just had that in her brain, and I remember thinking, well, I need to find out if this is true, but I don't really want to. But in my brain, it was like part of the grooming too. My family participated in that grooming as well, to a great degree. I had all my sisters and brothers, so I'm number 11 of 14. All my sisters and brothers had a cedar chest when they turned 18, full of hope chest stuff, dishes and stuff for when they had this arranged marriage. They would all of a sudden have to be like a household.
Right.
And I didn't have even a cedar chest. So I believe that my mother was planning for me to be a plural wife, which I wouldn't need that. So it played a lot into my story as well, is the grooming. Even it was like grooming from Warren Jeffs down, like they were watching him, and I was in a really tight spot. I didn't know how to fight him. I can't fight somebody who's that high in the church, and so or else just leave. That would be the ultimate thing, and I wasn't ready for that. Leave all my family and everything. So at 18, when I go into the room, it's exactly like my premonitions were, or whatever, those dreams. And he asked me, has God given you an impression of who you're supposed to marry? And I remember thinking, if I say no, he's going to give me a punishment, because that would be lying, because he groomed me.
Yeah.
If I say yes, then, that isn't what I really want. But I had to choose between either never getting married, probably, or just submitting. And I didn't know enough about it. I probably would have not done it if I would have known more. But I just said, I wondered if I was supposed to go in the family with my sister, who was in his family already. And he piped up right then and said, you have such a strong testimony of God. Yes. And he approved of it. And he had the ultimate say. But still, I went into shock that night. I remember him sending me home that night with my father, because I wasn't responding after he sent everybody out of the room. He wanted me to just be all, like, we're taught our whole life to resist boys and everything about them. Mm-hmm. And then overnight, you're just supposed to be so married, And I'm like, right. I'm like that, I didn't even know how to. Mm-hmm. So, he got mad and he sent me home. And I thought it was a blessing. I didn't even register that it was a punishment until like 4 months later. I was just like, oh, this is great. I get to come home. And anyway,
that was the night of your
that
marriage.
Was the night of our wedding.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think it just goes to show like how distorted that world was, where even growing up in the FLDS, the night of your wedding and you being sent away, you're so oblivious to the fact. We're in the real world. That would be like, wait, what happened? Like, what's wrong here? Usually that's very different usually in the real world as far as like a wedding night goes. But here this happens and you get kicked out and you're totally oblivious to the fact that you were being punished. It just shows you to go how left is right and everything is upside down.
Yeah, they literally went in the opposite direction of all the studies that are out here. They did the opposite thing. So the very first training, I was getting to this, the very first training he gave me after 2 weeks, or it was actually, so that day he told me to go and show up at this meeting that was going to be in the morning, that usually only the men went to. Our family, only the men went to. It was a work project meeting for donations and stuff. He said, I want you there. And so I went, and then he walked down the aisles and he like passed out corrections to leaders. And it was devastating in my mind. I remember thinking, I married you yesterday. Why would you, like, if you just did this without recommending I watch you do this, like, it would have been different. But this is not right. Like, we are taught our whole lives in our household, really emphasized on persuasion through love, which is a Doctrine and Covenants quote. But that wasn't happening.
What does passing out corrections mean? Like, what does that entail?
It's like a note that talks about you lose your family, you're kicked out, like you need to go repent, depending on who you are. Some people, like, those are strong ones, strong corrections. He said they were master deceivers, and he wanted everybody to know about it so that we wouldn't be deceived. And it was just really eye-opening to me that he would just like slam things in my face like that the day after I married to him.
So he was verbally passing out corrections, not like notes handed to people.
I think he passed out notes.
Oh, he passed out notes. Okay.
I don't know for sure, but I think he did. He walked down the aisles and he gave him something.
What did people's faces do when they start reading their notes?
They're sitting next to their wives and they're like gifts to each other, and now they're just like taken away, like I took that gift back, I could only see the backs of them because I was a little bit further back in the room, but it was devastating to everybody. And then he told me, like, when I was going to Texas, he told me to listen to his special training, that I had to covenant that I would never tell anybody. And I one of the things, like you talked about like the outside world and how we treated them and stuff, and we could tell lies to them all day to protect the real meaningful things. So I've just kind of reversed that, like
Yeah.
I don't tell lies, but I can say what I need to now and and tell the truth to the outside world.
Yeah, right. So I just got a question. So this is your story,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating to hear. But then there's also the broader general story that the public knows about Warren Jeffson, and primarily when he became on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. And so just looking at the timeline, it said September 2002 is when Warren Jeffs took over, roughly. And then it was roughly around 2005 is when the issues with law enforcement were really getting heavily involved. That's primarily, it said, like in July 2004, a nephew of Warren Jeffs files lawsuits against him, accusing Jeff of sexually abusing him. And so that took place. So along this whole timeline, when eventually became into the public eye and became a big thing, and at the very beginning of the podcast, we played him when he was having his first court appearance after being arrested. So at this time, like, where are you right now along kind of like this general timeline?
I was married on January 9th of 2003.
Okay.
Wow, so this was literally just months after.
Yeah, it was, and that's why I was 18 too, probably. I think, he knew for a lot longer than that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But he had to wait until he became a leader,
Right.
And so, like, he sits me down in this meeting, and he starts talking about this story about how he was running from the law. And I remember catching that the night of our wedding, like, he was talking to my father, and he said something about, and that's when it hit me. He's running from the law. But I should have known that probably before that. My mother wasn't invited to the wedding. My father was told to take me on a drive, so I wasn't even wearing my wedding dress or anything. And then
Go ahead. I'm just.
It's a spiritual wedding, can't be legal ever, because polygamy isn't legal in America. And so I sit down in this training, and he starts talking about when he took his children, his minors that were under 8 years old, away from his house that was a Target house in Hildale, Utah. That was where he had been living before he became the leader. And in this story, he talks about how God revealed that not one of the biological mothers that actually had those kids were worthy to continue to go with their kids until maybe they qualified later. So he talked about, like, he had like 30 mothers that had kids, at least 30. And all in one day, 30 mothers just lost their kids, and he took them away to another place, and they had to qualify. But mothers that didn't have kids could be put over those children.
Right.
But it didn't make any sense to me. That was a red flag to me, and I kind of wanted to be the witness from the inside. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to know more about those kids.
Yeah,
right. I have a passion for children, and I always have, and I was really concerned. When I heard that, I remember thinking, that's really weird. Like foster care is set up solely to reunite parents at all costs. And 30 mothers in one night, that God gave him those children, and now he's just saying they're all not worthy, is too extreme. It's just way too. And then later, I experienced living in that house with all of those mothers, and saw them crying and sobbing and praying, and they weren't the kind of mothers that weren't trying.
What does requalification to get your children's back even entail? Like, just
when God reveals that they are now taking the steps that.
This is what like sickens me about this, is like marriage is supposed to be like a shadow of the unity that we have with Christ, and it taking a marriage ceremony that we have with two becoming one flesh, but now like taking that, throwing it into the dirt, not even having a ceremony, but having it with all these people that literally become a means to the end for just the profit of the person, instead of actually being in a relationship, a loving, caring relationship like Jesus has with his bride, the body, the church, to sanctify and to make conform them more to his image.
Okay, they're going into all the religious rhetoric and like Yeah, we're not about that life, are we? But anyway, there was also an investigator who um, investigated the cult, who investigated the cult leader, and he he was really working very hard to get Jeff's, sent down, whatever. Anyway, Jeff's also had a favorite wife who he ran off with away from the law, that he went a fugitive for. So I'm gonna show the wife before we get to the law enforcement. So this, oh, let me see. There's not a better picture of her. Well, there he is with his wife. With his wife, is it his wife? Yeah, one of his favorite wives. So when he was found and taken, she was with him as well. Yeah. Oh, they're not showing. There she goes. One of his favorite wives. So the next one I'm going to show is the law enforcement man who took him down.
To go on the run. But this week we set our own Mike Watkins on his trail. His search for Warren Jeffs begins on the Arizona-Utah border. And that's where Mike is live tonight. Mike?
Yes, indeed, Patty. He is probably the most high-profile fugitive in this entire country. 49-year-old fugitive polygamous prophet Warren Steed Jeffs. He's been indicted on child sex crime charges in Mojave County. He's the subject of a federal fugitive warrant, and there's also a $10,000 reward being offered for his capture. So where is Warren Jeffs? Well, we're on the road, as you mentioned, all week long asking that question, and we start where this story starts, along the Utah-Arizona border, in the town of Colorado City. Everybody's looking for Mr. Jeffs. Do you have any idea where he might be?
I don't.
You don't?
I don't have any idea.
Any idea? From Colorado City's municipal offices to the front gates of what was once Warren Jeffs' massive gated compound, faithful followers of the fugitive prophet, obviously uninterested or unable to answer our questions today.
He has a system, a support system, unlike most. He has several thousand people supporting him, and he has millions of dollars behind him. So that individual like that could be very hard to find.
It's been said that veteran police officer Gary Engels is either the bravest or the craziest cop in America, and it's probably a little of both. Engels is the Mojave County Special Investigator assigned to Colorado City, and for more than a year he's been the one and only outside law officer inside the community, and it was Engels who built the criminal case against Warren Jeffs.
I'm the only man on the ground here, but you know, there's a lot of other people working on this too. The FBI is working on it pretty good. I'm fairly pleased with what they're doing.
And Engels certainly pleased with the recent arrest of Warren Jeffs' 32-year-old brother Seth, who was busted in the state of Colorado, allegedly transporting nearly $200,000 worth of money and supplies to his fugitive brother.
I think that kind of sent a little shockwave through the community here, because now they all realize that in helping Warren Jeffs, they can be criminally prosecuted.
Is that going to dry up some of his money source? Is this community still supporting him, sending him money?
Yes.
They are?
Yes.
So many of the people in this community are aiding and abetting a fugitive, in essence.
Well, technically, I guess you could say that, yes.
But Gary Engels under no delusion about conveying any kind of rational message to a man who sees himself as a messenger of God. Indeed, Engels says even on the run, Warren Jeffs continues the very behavior that brought Gary Engels to Colorado City in the first place. Is he still performing underage marriages even though he's on the lam?
To my knowledge, he is, yes.
So he's been charged with these crimes, but he's thumbing his nose at you guys, and he's still doing it, you think?
Well, he was thumbing his nose at the states back when he took over. You know, he stated that he wasn't going to abide by the laws, and he continued to perform the underage marriages.
And you come back to us live here along the Utah-Arizona border. Patty, in terms of that debate, whether Gary Engels is the bravest or the craziest cop, I got to vote for the bravest. He's done a lot of very significant work, and he's focused in many ways what we have focused on during the last decade. There's all the financial issues, all of the alleged wrongdoing, but he is focused on the victims of polygamy, the women and the children. He continues to do so. We're going to get on an airplane in just a couple of minutes. We got another stop tomorrow, Patty. We're going to go all over the western United States asking the question, where's Warren?
Where are you going tomorrow, Mike?
Well, we're going to go up to Salt Lake City and talk to some of the officials up there, but we have a travel log that really entails much of the western United States.
All right, we'll see you later. Thanks very much for that report. Mike Watkis reporting.
Yeah, sorry, my daughter's here. So, oops, it's still going. Okay. So, Warren Jeffs also was still communicating with the followers from the jail. I'm going to try and see if I can show the video of him communicating from the jail, because he continued being in communication with the followers, and they listened to his every word, being he is a so-called prophet, or that he was ordained by God, and he had the answers for them, as the young lady explained. So I'm going to show or hear him talking from the jail.
I am not the prophet. I never was the prophet. And I have been deceived by the powers of evil. And Brother William E. Jessup has been the prophet since Father's passing, since the passing of my father. And I have been the most wicked man in this dispensation, in the eyes of God. In taking charge of my father's family, When the Lord is God, told him not to, because he could not hear him, could not hear his voice. Because I did not hold priesthood, and I direct my former family to look to Brother William E. Jessup, and I will not be calling today or ever again.
He sounds like a weirdo, you know what I mean? He just really sounds so weird. He sounds like he's such a weirdo. So he took the prophethood by force. That's what I'm getting from all this, yeah? So he's confessing and everything. But the thing is that the followers still believe in him. After all this, and after all this is said and done, he gets caught and everything else. Um, they still believe in him. There's nothing he can say that is wrong. Even though he made a whole confession, So, this is a very long one, a very long video for me to play. I mean, we've heard how he is talking to the one of his members. So I'm sure might have to do another one, but hopefully this will be all on the FLDS because we heard this being three accounts, and it's this man is better off where he is than if he's on the outside. Even though the things still continue in that church till now, you know, nothing has changed. It's still the same. They still dress the same. They still do the same things to when he was there. So this is how deep a cult leader can have that much control over the followers. Even when they're away, they still have control over the followers. Okay, so I'm not going to prolong this and go past 2 hours, because this alone is there is a lot to unpack in this church, in this Mormon's church. Is like a bed of lies, basically. He lied his way through. He lied to get what he wanted. He saw an opportunity, he went for it. He was an opportunist, he was very predatorial to the children, to the women. There was no holds barred about this man. So um yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that, really, because there is more stuff to cover on this one. But to cover it, I'll probably be here like a whole 3 hours because he has so much information on this one man. I mean, there's probably more on the other cult leaders, but here you have this man who controlled everything on everybody's life. He took over. He told them when they can marry. He told them when it's just like, it's control at his best. He's a dictator. Like I keep saying, he's a dictator, and he dictated. But as my daughter's up and I cannot go further, I will leave it right here. Actually, YouTube probably make me cut out a few bits, but it's fine. I think I've tried to put in as much information as I can, so it's not as that much cut it up. So with that said, thank you, Claire, for coming through, and Earl, that Lawrence. Okay, so I'm gonna come off because, like, my younger one needs me now. So yeah, with that said, I will see you. Take care. Have a good day. Have a good afternoon.